Imagine living in a country where the sound of gunfire replaces morning prayers, where neighbors become strangers overnight, and where hope flickers like a candle in a storm. This is the story of Libya, a land once full of promise, now scarred by years of war and division. Today, I want to talk to you about a place called Libya. It's a country filled with ancient history, wide deserts, beautiful coastlines and people who, like all of us, want to live in peace. For many years, Libya was ruled by a man named Muammar Gaddafi. He led with a strong hand, and while he promised many things, not everyone felt free. People couldn't always speak their minds or choose their leaders. Then came a time when the world began to change. People in many countries started to raise their voices. In 2011, Libyans did too. They wanted fairness, they wanted change. Their voices became stronger, and soon, they were fighting for a new beginning. Many other countries watched, and some stepped in to help. Planes flew overhead, and leaders far away made decisions that affected lives on the ground. Gaddafi was gone, but so was the stability. With no one clear path forward, Libya began to divide. Two governments claimed power. Many groups held weapons, and in the middle of it all were families, mothers, fathers, and children trying to live. Even though peace talks have happened and some fighting has stopped, Libya is still trying to find its way. It's not easy to rebuild trust, but it starts with listening. It starts with care. Because even in a war-torn land, hope can grow just like a flower can grow through cracks in the pavement. In 1969, a young army officer named Muammar Gaddafi led a bloodless coup that overthrew Libya's King Idris I at just 27 years old. Gaddafi took control and established the Libyan Arab Republic, promoting himself as a revolutionary leader. He was deeply influenced by Arab nationalism and socialism, and he presented himself as a voice for anti-imperialism. Gaddafi introduced a unique political philosophy called the Third International Theory, which he published in his Green Book. This system was neither capitalist nor communist, but claimed to promote direct democracy through people's committees. However, in practice, power remained heavily concentrated in his hands. Over time, Libya became a centralized authoritarian state where dissent was not tolerated. Political opposition was banned, the press was tightly controlled, and dissidents were often imprisoned, tortured, or killed. Gaddafi nationalized Libya's oil industry in the early 1970s, using the wealth to fund massive infrastructure projects, social services, and his own foreign policy ambitions. He supported various liberation movements and rebel groups across Africa and the Middle East, earning both admiration and condemnation. Internationally, his regime became increasingly isolated, especially after being linked to acts of terrorism, including the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. In response, the United Nations and the United States imposed severe sanctions on Libya during the 1990s. Gaddafi later sought to rehabilitate his image by abandoning weapons of mass destruction and reaching out diplomatically to the West in the early 2000s. Despite these changes, the Libyan people still faced political repression, economic inequality, and lack of basic freedoms. By the time the Arab Spring began in 2011, frustration and anger toward Gaddafi's decades-long rule had reached a boiling point, setting the stage for mass protests and armed rebellion. In early 2011, the wave of popular uprisings known as the Arab Spring spread rapidly across North Africa and the Middle East, reaching Libya by mid-February. Inspired by the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, Libyan citizens began protesting against the regime of Muammar Gaddafi. The demonstrations initially started as peaceful gatherings demanding political reform, freedom of expression, and an end to corruption. However, the regime responded with brutal force. Security forces opened fire on unarmed protesters, prompting outrage and escalating the situation. The eastern city of Benghazi quickly became the center of the resistance, with local officials, military units, and civilians turning against Gaddafi. As the unrest spread, the opposition organized into the National Transitional Council (NTC), claiming to represent the Libyan people. What began as civil protests soon turned into a full-scale armed conflict, with rebel groups seizing territory and clashing with Gaddafi's loyalist forces. The situation drew international attention, especially after reports of mass killings and human rights violations. In March 2011, the United Nations authorized military intervention to protect civilians. NATO launched airstrikes targeting Gaddafi's military infrastructure under the pretext of enforcing a no-fly zone. Western and regional powers, including France, the UK, and the US, supported the rebels with air support and resources. The conflict continued through the summer, with both sides suffering losses. Key cities like Misrata witnessed intense fighting. As Gaddafi's grip weakened, his regime began to collapse. In August, rebel forces took control of Tripoli, Libya's capital, effectively ending his rule. Gaddafi fled but was eventually captured and killed by rebel fighters in his hometown of Sirte in October 2011. While the first civil war officially ended with his death, Libya was left fractured and unstable, with no clear successor or unified leadership to guide the country forward. After the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in October 2011. Libya entered a period of deep uncertainty and instability, with no strong institutions in place and the sudden collapse of centralized authority. The country quickly descended into chaos. A transitional government, the National Transitional Council (NTC), took charge temporarily, but it struggled to establish control over the entire nation. Libya was flooded with weapons left over from the war, and countless militias, many of which had fought to overthrow Gaddafi, refused to disarm. These armed groups began to assert control over towns, oil fields, and key infrastructure, often acting independently of any central authority. The General National Congress, GNC, was elected in 2012 with the aim of drafting a new constitution and leading the country toward democracy. However, political infighting, weak governance, and competing interests among Islamists, secularists, tribal leaders, and militias crippled its effectiveness. Many Libyans grew disillusioned with the political process, especially as violence and lawlessness escalated. Militias began clashing over territory and influence, leading to assassinations, kidnappings, and battles in major cities like Tripoli and Benghazi. As the central government weakened, extremist groups such as Ansar al-Sharia gained a foothold. Taking advantage of the power vacuum, the 2012 attack on the US consulate in Benghazi, which resulted in the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens, became a symbol of Libya's growing instability. The inability to integrate armed groups into a unified national army or police force deepened divisions. Ordinary citizens faced deteriorating living conditions, lack of services, and a breakdown of law and order. As the transition process faltered, tensions mounted between different political factions. By 2014, disagreements over the legitimacy of the newly elected House of Representatives and the refusal of militias to accept central authority pushed Libya into a second, even more complex and violent civil war. In 2014, Libya's fragile political situation collapsed further when disputed parliamentary elections created two rival governments, each claiming legitimacy. The newly elected House of Representatives (HOR) relocated to the eastern city of Tobruk, while the previous legislature, the General National Congress (GNC), refused to disband and re-established itself in Tripoli. This deepened the national divide and marked the beginning of Libya's second civil war. The country now had two major centers of power: the internationally recognized HOR in the east, supported by General Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army (LNA), and the GNC in the west, dominated by Islamist-leaning militias. In 2015, a United Nations-backed unity government, the Government of National Accord (GNA), was formed with the aim of reconciling the factions. However, it failed to gain full acceptance from either side and struggled to establish control beyond parts of Tripoli. The Second Civil War became more complicated due to the involvement of foreign powers. Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and France backed Haftar and the HOR. While Turkey and Qatar supported the GNA, these countries provided military aid, mercenaries, drones, and political support, turning Libya into a proxy battleground. Heavy fighting erupted in several cities, including Benghazi, Derna, and Tripoli. In 2019, Haftar launched a major offensive to seize Tripoli, which led to intense urban warfare and thousands of civilian casualties. Turkish military intervention in 2020, including air defense systems and Syrian mercenaries, pushed Haftar's forces back. Meanwhile, extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda attempted to exploit the chaos, especially in central Libya. The war devastated Libya's infrastructure, economy, and social cohesion. Millions were displaced, and basic services such as electricity, water, and healthcare became unreliable. Despite repeated attempts at ceasefires and negotiations, both sides remained locked in a struggle for territory, resources, and political dominance. As Libya's second civil war intensified, the conflict increasingly attracted the involvement of powerful foreign actors, each with its own interests and alliances. These external interventions turned the Libyan war into a proxy battlefield, prolonging violence and complicating peace efforts. On one side, General Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army, LNA, based in the east, received military and political support from countries like Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, France, and Russia. Egypt and the UAE provided air support, weapons, and funding. Seeing Haftar as a bulwark against Islamist groups and a force for regional stability, Russia sent private military contractors, notably from the Wagner Group, who played key roles in battlefield operations. France offered intelligence and logistical assistance, especially during Haftar's campaigns in Benghazi and southern Libya. On the opposing side, the unrecognized Government of National Accord, GNA, based in Tripoli, was backed primarily by Turkey and Qatar. Turkey's involvement intensified after a formal security agreement with the GNA in late 2019. Turkish drones, advisors, and Syrian mercenaries arrived in Libya in early 2020, helping to repel Haftar's siege on Tripoli. These advanced drone strikes and air defense systems proved decisive in shifting the military balance. In response, foreign-supplied weapons flooded the country despite a UN arms embargo, further fueling the war. International summits, such as the Berlin Conference in 2020, attempted to de-escalate tensions, but most outside powers continued to violate diplomatic agreements. The Libyan people paid the heaviest price as foreign agendas overshadowed national interests. Civilian areas were bombed, displacement increased, and vital oil facilities became battlegrounds. Rather than pushing for peace, many foreign actors entrenched the division by supporting their preferred factions. The longer these powers stayed involved, the more Libya's sovereignty eroded, making a lasting resolution even more difficult to achieve. Following years of brutal conflict, a glimmer of hope emerged in October 2020 when both sides, the Government of National Accord, GNA, in the west and the Libyan National Army, LNA, in the east agreed to a United Nations brokered ceasefire. This agreement marked a significant turning point as it opened the door for political dialogue and efforts to unify the divided country. In early 2021, a transitional government of national unity was formed through the UN-led Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. With the promise of leading the country toward national elections, Abdul Hamid Dabib was appointed interim prime minister, tasked with guiding Libya through the transition period. Optimism grew as previously blocked roads reopened, oil production resumed, and diplomatic ties with regional and Western nations were re-established. However, deep-rooted mistrust between factions and delays in election planning began to unravel progress. Elections originally scheduled for December 2021 were postponed due to disputes over laws, candidate eligibility, and the role of the presidency. These delays reignited political tensions. By 2022, Libya found itself once again split between rival administrations, Dabib's new in Tripoli, and a newly appointed rival government backed by the Eastern Parliament, led by Fathi Bashar. Clashes erupted in Tripoli and other areas, highlighting the fragility of the ceasefire. Despite ongoing UN efforts, Including talks on constitutional frameworks and security unification, meaningful progress remained slow. Foreign fighters, though fewer, still lingered, and many armed groups continued to operate independently. While major battles ceased, the threat of renewed conflict persisted. Ordinary Libyans continued to suffer from unreliable services, inflation, and a lack of security. National reconciliation remained elusive, as the absence of a unified military, electoral agreement, and trust between rivals kept the country in a state of limbo. Suspended between war and peace, with its future uncertain. The story of Libya's war is not just one of conflict, it is a story of a nation's deep struggle to define its future after decades of dictatorship. From the fall of Gaddafi to the rise of rival governments, from foreign interference to fragile ceasefires, Libya has been caught in a cycle of hope and heartbreak. Behind every headline are families who have endured loss, displacement, and years without stability. Though peace remains fragile, the courage of those who continue to strive for unity, dignity, and freedom keeps the nation's hope alive. Libya's journey is far from over, but its people have shown the world their resilience. And where there is resilience, there is always a path forward.